Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Triple F podcast. Triple F being faith, family, and freedom. I'm your host, Eva Andrade, and I'm here today once again with Jim Hochberg. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hello.
We're going to talk about the infrastructure bill, but don't worry, stay tuned. We're not going to get into the minutia of it, but we do have some interesting things we want to share. So let's chat about that. So, with all the craziness that's happening on the infrastructure bill right now, I think that it's one of the biggest things I'm getting a lot of emails about is what does the infrastructure bill have to do with me, not meaning me, but meaning me as a citizen of the United
The
States?
kingly me.
The kingly me, yes, because as a podcast that deals with kingdom principles, we are here talking about the principles that are going to be bestowed upon us in this wonderful infrastructure bill. So, let's talk about that.
So let's put it in perspective, because if you've seen our podcast before, you know, I really like to look at the source document, not coverage in newspapers or magazines and stuff, because I don't really want the spin the author wants me to get. I want to get the facts. And so I looked at President Biden's statement when he was on TV talking about it, and the fact sheet that the White House put out, and the actual bill itself. And there were some interesting things that really jumped out at me, because I don't often feel that I get the truth from the current White House. A lot of times I get marketing information, and it's not really the truth. So I was looking at this statement by President Joe Biden on the House passage of the bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
And just so we start with the facts, the bill was passed on November 4th.
Correct. In the House.
In the House. And it was a 228 to 206 vote.
Correct.
And I thought it'd be interesting to start with the breakdown of that, because they keep calling this the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And there were 215 Democrats that voted yes, and 13 Republicans that voted yes. There were 200 Republicans that voted no, and 6 Democrats that voted no. So when you're talking only 13 Republicans, bipartisan to me should be a little bit more than just throwing in the token Republican.
These days, bipartisan means preponderance. If one Republican participates, Liz Cheney or somebody, they call it bipartisan. But what's really interesting to notice about those numbers is if none of the Republicans voted for it, it would have failed, because the 5 House members in the Democratic Party that voted no would have killed it. And when we see what's in here, I hope we want to ask our representatives that did vote yes, why? Because there are some really bizarre things.
Well, it's hard to stay on top of this, because as you know, the bill morphed a million times because of what was going to be in it, what wasn't going to be in it. And this is what they're lobbying Congress about, right? They're down there saying, I need more money for this, take out money for this. But the other thing that made it confusing is because it's tacked on to the bill that they're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks.
Well, it may, but it may not.
Well, that's what was happening with the votes, though. There
Correct.
were some of the progressives that were saying no, because you're messing with the other bill, the Build Back Better bill. So if you're not going to do what I want on this, then I'm not going to give you the infrastructure. And so they thought that infrastructure would be easier to pass because it focused, right? Or it was supposed to focus on things like roads and internet and water.
Bridges and airports and train stations. Correct. So if you remember at the very beginning of the Biden legislative deal, he had that, I forget how many, $4 or $5 trillion that was both the infrastructure and the social spending and the Green New Deal, and it's been broken into 3 separate pieces now. But here's what I want to put this in perspective and context. What the president said, he told the truth in a collection of what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. He says in the first paragraph of his statement that they're going to turn the climate crisis into an opportunity. That is what this infrastructure bill is, turning the climate crisis into an opportunity.
And as always, we will be putting the links to everything we're talking about in the description of the YouTube link. So check
And
them
so
out.
we want to keep that in mind because not everybody agrees that there is a climate crisis. He does, and he's taking that and turning it into the opportunity to spend all this money. So he says on the second page of my printout, this bill will make historic and significant strides to take on the climate crisis. And then he says, which I thought was kind of interesting, because this is not what our federal government has done before. It will put out the first ever national network of electric vehicle charging stations across the country. Now, how did we end up with gas stations everywhere? People wanted to buy gas to put in the cars that they wanted to buy.
People needed to buy gas.
Well, at first there were a couple of cars and the rich guys had them. And they put their own gas or whatever. I don't even know. I'm not that old. And then people started to have cars and they started to need gas. So people started investing in gas stations. The government didn't build gas stations. That's the point. We're all collectively throwing money at the federal government building a national network of electric vehicles charging stations across the country. So for all of you who want to use those vehicle charging stations that are put together by the federal government, I'll see you in line at the post office.
Well, first of all, I'd like to know how many percentage of people actually are driving electric cars right now. I know that there are more now than there used to be, but right now, what Americans are really screaming out for help on is the gas prices. The gas prices are going up and up and up
Intentionally.
and up. Yes. So we're getting to a point now where those people that have bought these electric cars, they're going to be happy with this. But what about the majority of people that are driving automobiles?
They
that
don't
still
care
need
about
gas.
that.
Well,
They're closing another pipeline in the coming
Yes.
weeks. So then I looked at the fact sheet to keep this context going.
Right.
Climate crisis, right? So the words in the fact sheet from the bipartisan infrastructure deal, it boosts clean energy jobs, strengthens resilience, and it advances environmental justice, the White House. So these are the words. Combating the climate crisis. Climate change is impacting every aspect of life. Extreme, catastrophic, severe, extreme, severe. These are all the words that I highlighted going through. Existential threat. Climate crisis is a blinking code red. We're taking decisive action, urgent investment, strengthening our nation's resilience to extreme weather. How do you strengthen resilience to weather? You can't. It happens and you deal with it.
or you fall asleep when people are talking about climate.
So the context of this whole quote unquote infrastructure bill is this crazy climate change. This is why it's being called the Green New Deal. That's what the context that I wanted to share. So I will turn it back over to you.
Well, you know, when we're listening to, of course, the president is going to sell this, right? He's been trying to sell it for a long time. He's been trying very hard to get people to vote for it because, as we mentioned earlier, there was a little bit of a snafu on getting the votes that he had wanted to get. But, you know, when I was listening to his statement, he said something that has been quoted in the paper a couple of times. And I mean, as Christians, when we're thinking about something like this, we should really let this sink in. This is what he says. He says, generations from now, people will look back and know that this is when America won the economic competition for the 21st century. That is going to be one of those things.
Against whom?
Well,
Not China.
let's just, this is one of those statements. Whoever wrote this, they need to know that these are the kind of things that come back and haunt somebody later,
Yep.
you know, because the proof is going to be in the pudding. This is going to be one of those things they're not going to be able to hide. So everything that's happening with this infrastructure bill, you know, people in the United States are going to start feeling this stuff. There was a financial group by the name of Asset. We'll put the link in the description for you that want to see it. They did a really good job, in my opinion. Jim didn't like it because those of you that have watched Jim and I for a long time, you guys know that Jim and I don't always agree on things. We actually disagree quite a bit, but we agree on those fundamental truths.
Yeah. Well, no, when I was reading, they left out the things that I thought were important because they didn't think it was important. That's why I figured, well, I know what team they're on.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, what I liked is that they put the infrastructure bill in a way that normal people can look at it, see what is included in it
From their spin.
from their spin. But
Yeah.
I think they did better than most, though. And you and I were talking about that a couple
And
of
they made
shows ago.
graphs and charts,
And
which
they
you
made
also like.
they graphs and charts, but they put the links. And you and I have
Yes.
talked about that. If I can go
Absolutely.
check the source
Absolutely.
document, I'm a happy, happy camper. And so when you're looking at the things that are going to be included in the infrastructure bill, you're thinking to yourself, okay, this is good. We need things like this to happen because this infrastructure bill is not the first of its kind. I mean,
No,
many
that's how
presidents.
Eisenhower made the highway system.
Absolutely. And so people driving along the roads, you know know who you are. Complaining about those potholes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm talking to you. You know, you sitting over there. This people are upset about stuff like this. So let's say that it's okay for them to put money into to making a better infrastructure. We like that. But when you look at this long 1,000+ page document, you see what's included, and you found something very, very interesting.
Well, why don't
in
you
there.
talk about the stuff from this financial group? Because they do break out a lot of topical information and they spin it their way, but the topics are correct.
Well, yes. And they also gave a history on how we got to this point. They talk about how the progressives initially refused to vote for it, right? Because they wanted specific
Well, they
stuff
continued
in
to
the Build
refuse
Back
to
Better.
vote. 5 voted no.
Yes. But there were some moderate Democrats who pushed back too because they wanted to see the actual cost estimate coming from the CBO office on the Build Back Better. And our representative, Ed Case, was one of those representatives that is demanding this. And let me say, whether you agree with Representative Case on all the issues, what I appreciated about this particular issue is that he wants to vote on a bill that he knows what's in it. And if you're going to throw out a bill with a price tag on it, like they're doing, then at least he's trying to hold their feet to the fire. And so kudos to you, Representative Case, for at least holding their feet to the fire on that. Now, that's supposed to happen around November 14th for them to vote on that bill, but we'll stay tuned on that and we'll still talk about it. But anyway, so this breakdown, they talk about all the roads and bridges they're going to do. They talk about public transit, freight rail, power infrastructure.
And read the numbers.
Okay, so 110 billion for roads, bridges, and major projects. 105 billion for public transit, passenger and freight rail. 70. I mean, I'm just a
It's
normal
a lot of money,
person,
man.
and I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about, okay, I know they don't teach this in school anymore, but when I was in school, they actually taught you how to balance a budget. And I don't even know like how many zeros are on billions. No, I do. But I mean, this is a lot of money we're talking about. 73 billion for power infrastructure, 65 billion for high-speed internet, 55 billion for clean drinking water. Who knew? Who knew? 50 billion for resilience and Western water infrastructure, 25 billion for airports, and 65 billion for additional programs. Now, I travel a lot because of my job, and I will say that there are some airports out there that seriously need some upgrades. So again, I think reasonable people understand that there is a need for some of this infrastructure spending. But let's talk about the interesting part of the bill that you came across.
Well, so I actually looked at the bill itself, and for some reason it prints super small, but it's actually a collection of separate acts titled and subject matters. So there's Division A is surface transportation. It goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages. This thing's like 1,000+ pages long, right? You get down to Division F, and now infrastructure includes broadband, which I suppose is modern infrastructure.
Well,
I mean, it's digital infrastructure,
and
right?
what we were hearing is there were cases across the nation where like there were school children who were not in places where they had access to internet. And that's hard when you have a shutdown and you need to work
Correct.
remotely.
No, I get it.
So,
I get it. But the question for me is, should the government be doing this or should the private industry? Because when the government does it, they have no competition. And when the private industry does it, they hopefully have competition or they're a monopoly. And if they have competition, they have to keep prices down and service up. The quality has to be high, or me as a consumer of what they're selling, I'll go to the better one, right? So anyway, Division F is broadband. And then under Title III of, and by the way, this is on the 10th page of the table of contents. Title III Digital Equity Act of 2021, there is a section on general provisions that has some interesting things, and that's way, way in page 800 and something. So you don't hear about this. If you can't read 700 pages, you're never going to know about this before you vote on it.
Okay,
See, that's the
you
thing.
and I do this for a living, Jim, and I really tried to read the bill. I really, really did. And there's a lot of information in it, a lot of numbers.
Well, I highlighted sections because I thought those were good. So Division F on the broadband. Title III is the Digital Act. So digital equity is a term that they're defining in this. Digital equity. Now, that is such a strange term. Digital equity. Well, they define it. It means the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation in the society and economy of the United States. Okay, I guess I know what that means, I suppose. But then they have another really weird definition of a word in the Digital Act, gender identity. Now, why, if it's the Digital Act, how would they even know what anybody's gender is? But they're defining it, and it has the meaning given to the term in another section of the code. So then I'm thinking, okay, so we have infrastructure for broadband, and they want to know that gender identity is involved. I really don't get that. But then they have, it's the sense of the Congress that achieving digital equity is a matter of social and economic justice and is worth pursuing. Okay. I'll let that one slide. I just can't believe people get paid to write this stuff. Then they have how they're going to develop this thing. And they're going to have money for states. A state that wishes to be awarded a grant under subsection D shall develop a state digital equity plan for the state, which will include the identification of the barriers to digital equity faced by covered populations in the state and a bunch of other things. And I'm just thinking, what the heck does this mean? And then here's why I want to talk about this. There's going to be a period of 30 days for public comment. You own your government. They're taking your money in this act and doing things with it, and they're going to give you a chance to comment. You've got to own your government. So here's the public availability. The administering entity for a state shall make the state digital equity plan of the state available for public comment for a period of not less than 30 days before the date on which the state submits the application to the federal government for the money. And so we need to be paying attention when this comes out, because how much money was in the Digital Act? You look for that, because it's big bucks.
It was big bucks.
So while you're looking for that,
65 billion.
65 billion of your dollars are being spent, and you're going to have an opportunity to comment on whatever you want. And here's something that you're going to have the opportunity to comment on. I want to thank our friend Dave Fowler for pointing it out, because he was on one of our earlier shows somewhere. And so this is section 60,307 of this bill. General provisions. They have a non-discrimination in digital equity legislation. And this is very interesting. No individual in the United States may, on the basis of actual or perceived race, that's very odd.
Perceived race?
On the basis of actual or perceived...
Wait, I thought that they settled that you can't
Look, this is your
identify
Congress.
as a race.
This is your Congress. No individual in the United States may, on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, or disability, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity that is funded in whole or in part with funds made available to carry out this title, the digital equity title.
Oh, so just the digital equity, or is that everything in the infrastructure bill?
No, just this title.
Okay.
And it goes further to say enforcement. The assistant secretary shall effectuate this paragraph by issuing regulations and taking actions consistent with the Civil Rights Act. So when they, in Hawaii, publish what the plan is, and I hope everybody reads the thing, and we'll do a show on it, I hope. And what we can ask them in our comments is things that make sense when you're not a bureaucrat writing legislation. The problem is these bureaucrats writing this stuff have a goal. They are working toward utopia. And this is part of that utopian vision. They got no practical common sense. In a digital infrastructure equity plan, meaning nobody ever steps into your home, you buy your access through Spectrum or whoever you buy it through, Direct TV or whatever, and then you just have it already. Unless what they're trying to do is use that to say, if your use of this online access is discriminatory, we're going to come get you.
That's interesting. We're going to have to follow
That's
that
what
to
I don't
see
like
what it
about
means.
it.
Yeah, we're going to have to follow that. Just so that we can kind of pull this into what this infrastructure bill means for Hawaii. What I want to do first, though, is I want to say that at least this is one of those things that's going to play out as well, is that President Biden also said that, and I quote, "This bill is also fiscally responsible."
Oh, I laughed
fully
at that.
paid for,
Almost peed
and
my
doesn't
pants.
raise the deficit. It does so by making sure that the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share, and doesn't raise taxes a single cent on anyone making less than $400,000 per year.
And that's what I was referring to when I said at the beginning, I don't get a lot of truth from this White House. That's what I was referring to.
The proof is going to be in the pudding. We're going to follow this.
And actually, the real quote is, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Just in case you wondered.
Well, thank you. I feel fully spanked now, Jim Hochberg. Okay, so let's say now, how does this affect Hawaii? Right? Because you and I, we live here in this beautiful place. So Ed Case, when he gave his statement about this particular passage, and he was happy that it passed, he said that there's going to be at least $1.5 billion for roads, bridges, and major projects. This is specifically for Hawaii now. $637.4 million for public transit. I'm wondering how many people are looking at all of that craziness that happened with the monorail. With this, are people seeing dollar signs, you think, on this? I don't know.
I hope so. And if you're not paying attention enough to recognize that, please start paying attention.
I'm telling you, because this was another subject that people thought was just going to be up and down, but here it is a couple years later, and we're still talking about that. $246 million for airports. 160 airports, meaning, the Daniel K. Inouye Airport and, the
Kauai and everywhere, yeah.
160 million for broadband, Jim. So for us here in Hawaii,
we're getting 160 million for the Equity Digital Act or whatever.
And we'll keep you posted on that one. 200.4 for water infrastructure. 18 million for electric vehicles. You know what I want? I want them to give me some of that money so I can buy an electric car. I'm one of these people that, like, my car is going to die any day. And I'll tell you what, if I could go buy a new car, I probably would. So I don't know. This is insane. 18 million for electric vehicles and 3 million for clean energy and grid. So I think that there's going to be some great things that will come from this money. This money that's sitting in a pot somewhere in Washington, because they're sitting on all this money, right? That it's not going to affect us, right? According to the president, this will not affect us. We will not pay a penny more.
So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Is this infrastructure bill going to let us finally repair the natatorium?
No, that's probably not in there. But
really? Do you know that my
Yeah.
entire life we've been promising to fix the natatorium?
I thought the last thing I read they were going to get rid of it. Like,
Well, no, but now we got all
we
this
got money.
infrastructure
Yeah,
money.
the natatorium. For those of you that don't know, there were people that actually used to swim there, and
Duke Kahanamoku trained for
there's
the
a
Olympics.
great history there for the natatorium. So yeah, well, I don't know, Jim. Are you going to send a letter to Representative Ed Case or Representative Kai Kahele and ask them that question?
Yeah,
Okay. Well, we'll come back on the show.
we'll
and
put a
see.
link next time.
Okay, we'll do that.
So one of the interesting things, the electric vehicles, Hawaii gets at least 18 million. Funding to build out electric vehicle what? Charging stations to enable long distance travel in Hawaii. I laughed out loud. You got to be kidding me.
Because it's for that underground tunnel between here and Maui that's coming.
And to provide convenient charging where people live and work. So maybe on the Big Island, you can need a charging station by Volcano as you're going up Saddle Road or something. I don't know. Access to an additional $2.5 billion in nationwide grant funding dedicated to electric vehicles and alternative fuel charging infrastructure. Again, it's going to be junk because there's no competition. No competition. It's just not going to be any good. But I liked Ed Case's survey.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is put a link to Representative Ed Case survey. He asked people how they felt about that, and we don't really have time to get into it right now, but we want you to take a look at it. There were some interesting things in it. Not surprising. Hawaii is a blue state. We're very we tend to be pretty moderate to liberal here. There are some conservatives. And
79% of the respondents were not conservative.
Yeah, so that kind of shows you where we're at. But as always, we do this show because we want you to stay plugged into what's happening in the government, not only locally, but nationally as well. And how does it affect you and your family right here in the beautiful state of Hawaii? So when we come back on the next show, we've got some exciting things. So stay tuned. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification button. So every time we upload a new video, you'll know about it. Comment. Jim and I are going to get to
another
those.
show
We're going to do
about
a show about comments. So just give us some time and we'll get there. And we will see you next week. Mahalo for joining us.
Aloha.